is the first official day of spring in the greatest city in the world. It is a stunningly beautiful day. It's like 68 degrees or something like that. Just absolutely perfect weather. Just getting out of work. I have a few minutes to make a video with you, and just something real quick that I'd like to talk about. So, a few weeks back, we finished our 4th property survey in Kittanning, which was very exciting. And then I did something a little bit different this time around. I went to Kittanning Borough Council meeting, and I gave them some homework based off of the data that we have. I gave them what I'm calling the list of fives, and it's basically, it's the properties throughout the borough, the residential properties that have the most damage. Most of the houses are vacant or abandoned or have absentee landlords, or just they're in extraordinary disrepair. These are not just like houses that need a little bit of work. These are houses that are on the verge of, at some point in the future, needing to be torn down, or needing to be 100% remodeled on the outside. And so I gave them that list because they're the houses that are the most difficult for us to solve through Summer Reserve. There are too many of them, really, for Habitat for Humanity to tackle them all. You know, it's a 20-year problem. Unless codes enforcement can happen on the properties, they can place liens on the ones that have been vacant or burned out for a long period of time. And then if the borough could get a hold of them, then they could either tear them down or get them into the hands of investors that can actually make a difference. In other words, it's a problem that is extraordinarily difficult to solve, and I'm a live in government kind of person, and yet I look at this and say, you know, this is what government's actually designed for. This is the problem that it should be trying to solve. So some of you might be thinking to yourselves, well, what's the big deal? And, you might just have a point. What is the big deal? Can't we just wait for these things to kind of solve themselves? Is a vacant property really all that bad? And I would tell you that we've seen evidence over just within the last 12 months that vacant properties are an extraordinary drain on the community, and they're extraordinarily dangerous as well. So let's take a look at a few examples here. First house here on Hawthorn Avenue. It's making a bid currently for most improved house in Kittanning, and it's very early in the year. Looking pretty good. Fresh paint, new porches, all kind of good stuff happening here. I'm so very excited to see all this construction work happening here because this house, it definitely has a history. When we first moved to Kittanning, we were actually looking at homes on Hawthorn Avenue, a couple different ones that we looked at to potentially buy and live in town. And I remember at that point, this one had a house fire in it, and it literally sat vacant for about a decade, at least a decade, until a couple years ago when Kittanning Borough passed a vacancy ordinance. I'm not sure if this house was actually part of that, but my assumption is that it was, and there was something that happened here that made it finally start to move. And now it's going to be this beautiful duplex again. It'll probably be one of the nicest looking houses on the entire block. They're doing a fantastic job. I don't know if it changed owners or what might have happened, but all kinds of stuff happening here. Last summer, there was a troubled young man who was starting fires in this very alley, and this house, being a vacant one, was one of the targets. And if it would have caught on fire, it would have been incredibly destructive. So I'm happy that it's still here. It's kind of tough to say luckily, but luckily there were a lot of different fires that happened, and so a lot of different people were alerted, and none of the houses were too extraordinarily damaged. It was still very bad for the neighborhood, and this hopefully will be a house now that'll be occupied soon, and it won't be a target for someone that wants to start a fire in the future. So that's one property that looks like it's going to have a happy ending ultimately, but I do wonder to myself, what would it have been like if something had happened 1 year after the fire instead of 1 decade after the fire? What difference would it have made for that block and for the neighborhood? It's a question that we probably won't ever have a full answer to, but we do have some statistics that we can share for what a vacant property means to a neighborhood. Did a full video on this property here in Wick City, one of the largest fires, certainly the largest fire since I've lived in Kittanning. This is also probably the largest vacant property in town, and it was an absolutely massive one. And of course, it didn't just take out all of the commercial buildings, it took out the house next door on both sides, the house across the street, siding damage, and then probably, I don't know, 8 to 10 other houses with some kind of damage, either on the actual residential structure or the garage. So that's another building that sat for more than a decade with lots of damage that was never addressed. So let me give you some statistics on vacant properties. I looked up many different fire studies. That I couldn't come up with an exact number, but somewhere between like 3 and 10 times as many fires happen in vacant structures. And what I mean by fires is non-contained fires. So a lot of times a fire department might get called for a fire that's on a stove or something like that, but it stays contained within that appliance. But vacant houses, that doesn't really happen because there's no one there to stop it once the fire starts. And a lot of times, you have total losses on vacant property fires, and then it also damage other structures like we saw with the old Wick City furniture place there. Forgot to mention in the video, the house that I'm sitting in front of is actually caught on fire less than a week after I went and talked to Borough Council. So that's 3 fires in vacant properties in less than a year. Not to mention, vacant property fires are also more dangerous for our local firefighters to fight because number one, the fires are generally more severe, and number two, when they go inside, they're not really sure, like a normal residential house, what they're going to be running into. There can be holes in the floor, there can be other damage, other weak points in the structure, and so it's generally much more dangerous fires to fight. So just wanted to make those 2 points. Back to the statistics. Number 2, vacant properties are linked to higher incidences of drug use and drug crimes. A study in Austin, Texas found that blocks with even one unsecured vacant building had 3.2 times as many drug calls to police as a normal residential property. Number 3, with drug use, a lot of times comes criminal activity. 1.8 times as many theft calls, twice the number of calls for violent crime if you had one house on a block that was unsecured and vacant. And lastly, from a very practical perspective, decrease in property value. A study in Philadelphia, which is probably not so dissimilar from our neighborhood when it comes to property values in places that have vacant houses. So a study in Philadelphia said that they had $7,000 loss for every home that was within 150 feet of a vacant property. So if we look at this one here on North Grant, which we've been doing for Summer of Serve now for the past 8 years, friends, with really no discernible change in the status of this property. There's a house here, house here, house here, house here, house here, house here, and then across the alleyway there's another half a dozen houses that are all within 150 feet. If we go 7,000 times probably the 12 houses that are within this area, man, that's a pretty big loss. What is that? $84,000, I think? Just doing some quick math in the top of my head. Hopefully I got that right. But $84,000 in value, plus losing the tax money, losing all the different things on this property itself too. This could be a productive property. We can't do this anymore. Like we can't go another 10 years and be telling the same story about these kinds of places in Kittanning. Now I'm giving very specific examples here, obviously. Not all the houses on the list of 5s are like this one, but there are at least a half a dozen. And so it's time. It's time to get moving on these. For the most part, Borough Council was very receptive to receiving the list, very thankful for it. And there was one person that was not so happy with me, but I'm not going to get into all that today. I believe the future is bright, and I do believe that if they can do something with these properties, what we're doing through Summer of Serve, what Habitat for Humanity is doing, what all of the amazing people of Kittanning are doing, investing in their homes and improving the neighborhood, we can make the change even faster than it's already going. And it's already going pretty fast. I mean, the story overall is very, very good, but this was like, dear Kittanning Borough, like, if you guys can do your part, we're going to keep doing ours, and we're going to change this city for the better. I actually followed up with the borough manager and the really nice young lady that's helping out with administration for code stuff, and so there's already some good things happening. They're taking it very seriously. They're super helpful to me as well. Like, they're helping me put together the commercial property vacancy list so that we can do a better job of marketing those properties and hopefully get them into the hands of some great entrepreneurs. And so there's a lot of good things happening in the borough. Man, they have a hard job. Not only that, they don't have the resources to do what they need to do, so a hard job is already made more difficult. And so this video is not meant to be negative on Kittanning Borough at all, but it is meant to address one of the foundational goals of Kittanning 300, to have a more effective and efficient local government. And I think the only way that can happen is if we all work together to solve some of these big problems that we have in town. Vacant properties is one of them that touches absolutely everything. It affects local business, it affects the problem of addiction, and obviously it affects the problem of residential blight. And so, man, if we can solve this one, it's a big piece of the pie for the future of Kittanning. Gotta go pick my daughter up from piano lessons. I'm a couple minutes late. I spent too much time talking to you guys. Doing Did you have a good lesson?
Yeah.
Yeah? You know what? I have a surprise.
Huh.
It's free ice cream day at Dairy Queen. First day of spring. You think you want some ice cream?
Yeah. Daddy, looks like a lot of people like Dairy Queen.
Oh, thank you.
Do you mean that?
Thank you. You too. What do you think?
Dad!
Every day is a great day with free ice cream.
Uh-huh.